What? Oh, all right. I won't make you laugh. Good evening. Oh, wasn't that good just now with Mark Memphis? Brilliant. What a laugh. Funny. I love that guy to bits. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming on. Now we're waiting for adaca, costa, di caio. Oh, okay. It's it's like a pizza person, isn't it? You know what I mean? You know. Anyway, there you go. You know what, guys? I had my hair out Hair out. I had my hair cut yesterday, and my hair looks like Bart Simpson on the bad day. There you go. Okay. Hello.
Hi,
Oh, I, I thought I couldn't hear you then. Thank you very much for joining me.
you're very welcome. I'm sorry that I have been late. I've had some IT issues.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. We all have IT issues, and I'm glad you're here. Tell everybody about yourself.
Well, I'm Ava da Costa Maya. I'm a coach and a speaker and an author of a book, which I called Choose to Be Excellent, Even When Everything Else Sucks. And in my book, I outline some of the things that I've had to survive in my life. And one of them was the death of my baby daughter. And I mentioned that when I spoke to you before about domestic abuse and narcissistic personality disorders and things
Mm,
like that. And we talked about me coming back and outlining some of that bereavement process
yes.
and moving forward from
Yeah,
guilt.
I do remember, but I just wanted to kind of do a catch up for all my listeners out there,
That's
so
good.
that they know that who you are about. So yeah. Um, Tell me about the time when you lost your daughter.
Okay. This happened in 1995, so it's a long time ago now, but it's not the sort of thing that fades with time when
Right.
you lose a child the way that we did. I was very young and pregnant with my first daughter, and we were obviously very nervous parents, and we had planned the way that people do, and I had my little bag full of tiny things ready to go to the hospital, and I had a room for her and a beautiful little cot all ready to bring home our child. But unfortunately, the fates had decided differently. So my daughter died as a result of complications during the birth, and she was born not breathing after many days of labor. So she was not a miscarriage. She was what they call a stillbirth, which means that it wasn't early in the pregnancy. She was born on Valentine's Day, which was the day that she was due. And I went home with a little bag of tiny things and no daughter. And she of course would be 26 now, and I think of her every day.
Right?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
So as you can imagine, the the shock of finding out that this child was never going to draw breath caused a shift inside my mind. It was like a little click that went, No, no, I don't accept it. I just don't accept it. And I didn't. I did not accept it. After that incredibly traumatic event of her birth, and I never got to hold her, they never showed her to me. They told me she was perfect, but she was taken away. And now we know that that's really damaging, but at the time, that wasn't necessarily in everyone's consciousness. So I never saw my baby. I never held her. I never got to say goodbye. And these professionals who had let me down so profoundly took her from me again. And when I say there was like a little click in my mind where I just went, actually, I don't accept that. It was almost a physical click that just went, no, I'm not accepting it. And when I'd gone home from the hospital and I was physically healing from what I'd been through, I went down to the village for a walk and I purchased a little tiny pair of shoes for her because I was just not accepting she was gone. And I continued to do that. I continued to prepare for her arrival. I didn't get any mental support. There was no counselling. There was no compassion in any of the hospital staff. It was a harrowing experience. And I went on later to have another child, a couple of years after that. So I have a beautiful daughter who I'm immensely proud of, who's 25 now just. And we had a lot of fertility treatment, actually, to catch with any of my babies. So 5 years later, we had another little girl and completed our family. So we had our 2 living daughters and our 1 angel child. And then all of a sudden, 9 years later, we had another completely unexpected and most wonderful child. So I have 3 daughters now, all of whom I adore down to the very bones of them. And I'm incredibly grateful for their presence in my life. And I have to say that in scrabbling around for some sense or some sort of good outcome of this, I did find one. I found one outcome, which is that I never did sleepwalk through my children's lives. I loved every second of them, even the tough times, even when they were having tantrums, even when I just wished they'd sleep. I still loved every second of raising those girls, and I still do, and I delight in them. I delight in everything that they do. I am filled with admiration for all of them. And I don't know that I would have been as grateful if I hadn't lost so profoundly so early in my life.
Yeah.
And losing my daughter was not the first time I'd experienced grief, because I lost my mother when I was very young as well. And yet the experiences were completely different. When I lost my mother, the morning that she died, which was a frosty July morning in Africa, it's frosty in July in Africa, as cold as it gets. And it was a Sunday morning, beautiful, crisp morning, and an aunt came to our house to tell us that my mother had passed away. And the world just screeched to a stop like a vinyl record being scratched. And everything that was good was suddenly just gone. She was the one that got excited for Christmas. She was the one that got us ready for school, that knew who had what assignments. She was the one that knew our dress sizes and when we were supposed to go to the dentist. And then she was gone. And I missed her like I couldn't breathe. But there is something natural about your parents passing on. She'd been very ill. It was a blessed release. I know that she had found it very hard to bear the pain that she was in. So You can make those kind of justifications in your mind when you lose a parent. It's incredibly painful. But losing my daughter was so unnatural that my mind revolted against it, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't accept it. And here's the thing, with grief, it it doesn't matter whether you accept it or not. You can't argue with it. It doesn't care. It doesn't care. And I spent 18 years fighting the acceptance of my daughter's death. Still angry, still bargaining, still wishing every day, longing for one hold of her tiny body that was taken from me so brutally.
I'm very sorry about that. Um, and I know this is kind of like another time for you, but um, well, it's it sometimes it's. What would you say to people who's listening now? It's been going through the same thing as you.
Well, what I would say is when you're going through hell, don't stop. Grief is not a barrel that you get into and nail the lid shut. It's never going to go away. It doesn't go away. And people say to you, you've got to move on. You've got to move on. No, you don't. You do not have to move on from your grief. It becomes a part of you. It forms a coalescence inside you that is beautiful in some ways. It has an iridescence to it, a joy that you knew the person, a thankfulness for their existence. This is really hard when you have a stillborn because that existence is so very fleeting, so incredibly fleeting. But I loved that child, and that love was a blessing. So I can be grateful that she was around, even though I was the only one that knew her. And that gratitude can bring a beauty to your grief that isn't there when you're still angry. So you've got to get past the angry. And the angry is often justified. If you've lost a dear one because of an accident that somebody caused, or because they took their own life, there's so much anger around that, and there's shame at the anger and all of this. But these are very natural and human responses, and you are allowed to feel them.
Of
And you
course,
should give
yeah,
yourself
yeah,
that space.
yeah. But what they did for you, what the 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 people did to you, was totally horrible. They shouldn't have taken the baby from you
There
straight
was a
away.
lot
You
they
know what I
did.
mean?
There was a lot they did that was indefensible. And something, I was angry and I was hurt, and it didn't hurt them at all.
Oh no,
They
they don't
didn't
care.
care. They carried on with their lives, but I was stuck in bitterness, and I couldn't move on from anywhere because I was so busy avoiding the acceptance and that healthy pain that comes with accepting the way things are. And I was fighting it. And it took all of my energy, and it took all of my positivity, and it took all of my light. And then I was on a course. It was a personal development course, and the coach was standing at the front of the room, and she was talking about acceptance. And I was thinking, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to listen to this. This is not for me. This is for other people. And she sat there and said, okay, I would like you to look at the floor. So we all looked at the floor studiously because we're very compliant. So we look at the floor, and she goes, what do you think about the floor? We're like, well, it's doing a good job of holding the chairs up. And she said, yeah, is it pretty? We're like, not particularly. It's serviceable, but it's not, I wouldn't call it pretty. She said, I would like you to tell it what you think. If it's got a stain on it, tell it. So I sort of look at the floor, and feeling like a bit of a mug, I go, you're a bit messy and you're stained and there's litter on you. You need to sort that out. And she goes, okay, do you think the floor feels insulted? And I said, no, I do not. She goes, okay, you could do the same thing to your chair or your shoe or anything else. You can argue with it if you like. It's an inanimate object and it cares nothing for your opinion. And that's what your past is like. I was like, wait, hang on, no. This is not a piece of my history that I wish to come to terms with. She said, you cannot argue with your past. It doesn't care. I was like, oh my God, my mind was blown. My mind was blown. In that moment, I got it. I got it that I'd been arguing with my past instead of having a healthy, normal grief reaction. And I was still stuck 18 years ago, still wishing and yearning and longing for my dead baby instead of mourning and honoring my dead baby.
Mm. What was it
And I,
like? Sorry. What was it
carry on.
like in your relationship?
Well, there was a piece of me that was unavailable because it was frozen in time. So I was unable to be kind to myself because I was still at the biggest failure of my life was my failure to protect my baby and bring her into the world.
So
And
did you
that's how I
blame
saw
yourself?
it. Oh, I absolutely blamed myself
Yeah.
because I didn't have the clinicians around who I now know let me down so fundamentally. Um, they what they did was, as I say, indefensible. It was completely foreseeable what happened to me, but they did not act on clinical signs. So my anger turned inwards, my pain turned inwards. I detested myself. I had contempt for myself. So one part of me was trying really hard to make up for that. So I was a really wonderful person in some ways. I was an amazing mother. I was super dedicated to my children. I was super dedicated to my husband. I was super dedicated to doing my ironing at 3 in the morning. I had a high flying career. You might say that outwardly I looked very successful. And the inward battle was so damaging and exhausting. And it ground me to a point where I was so depressed, I was ready to take my own life. And I was really ready. The only reason I didn't do it was I couldn't work out a way to keep the girls safe afterwards. That's the only reason I didn't do it. And it was very attractive to me as an idea. I was completely in love with the idea of oblivion because the pain I was living in was so intense. And here's the thing, you must have heard the allegory about pain, and this is incredibly useful. And I wish I could credit the person who came up with it, but I can't remember who they are, but it's all over the internet, where it talks about your pain being a ball, and the ball is in a box. And on the side of the box is a button. And every time the ball hits the button, you feel the grief, the way you felt it the first day. And what happens in time is the ball gets smaller as you start to heal, but the button is still there in the box. And when the ball hits the button, you feel the grief. But what happens is it happens less often. So it starts to be less about the fact that the person died and more about the fact that they had been alive. And that's when you get to honor them. And that's when you get to mourn them healthily. Because the price of loving somebody is grieving them when they go.
So if people are listening now,
I'm
and
sorry, I can't quite hear you, Steve.
yeah, sorry, if people are listening now and it's going through the situation because I'm getting a lot of messages here from my radio, and there's a lot of people saying, they kind of like, you know, they're saying about you. They're saying, send my best wishes to her and everything. We're getting a lot. If people are listening now, which they are, what would you say to them if if they're going through the same what you did?
I would say that you don't have to do this on your own. Don't do it on your own because it's a horrible pathway to walk. And there are people who have been through this before, and we will have compassion for you. But you have to have compassion for yourself. Now, when I wrote my book, I called it Choose to Be Excellent, even when everything else sucks. And you know, when you lose your baby girl, everything sucks. Everything sucks.
Yeah, I was
You
going to get
can,
you back and talk about your book, because I don't really want to talk about it at the moment because it makes me cry. And but I've got to get, um, it's very good book, by the way.
thank you, Steve. But the reason I wrote it was because this experience cut me down to being a shell of the person I should be.
Yeah,
And it took me a long time to realize that that was a choice. And it's a completely valid choice. It is utterly reasonable to fall apart when you hurt to the extent that it hurts when you're bereaved. And you are allowed to fall apart. And this is the thing, we define excellence based on these external criteria that actually have nothing to do with what excellent really means. For me, now that I know, now that I've gone through these things, I know that there are days in which excellence means I got out of bed and brushed my teeth.
yeah,
And there are days in which excellence means that I wrote another chapter of my book, or I stood up and spoke in front of 1,000 people.
mm,
And those days I feel great. Do you know why? Because I've got external validation of what excellence means. But nobody in an audience of 1,000 people, when I'm standing up there and I'm saying, you can do this. If I can do this, you can do this. Because there is nothing special about me that isn't special about you. And I totally, absolutely believe that. I can stand there and I can transform 1,000 lives in an afternoon. And it feels amazing.
are you in the UK?
Yeah,
Are you?
yes.
Right. Okay.
So sometimes that is excellence, right? They don't know that there are other days when my little box of life has got my little grief ball smacking against the button on the side and it's going, I'm hurting. I'm really hurting today. Today it is brought home. My little one was born on Valentine's Day. So every year, while all the couples in the world are declaring love to each other, I throw roses in the sea to say goodbye to the little soul that was my child. And you can imagine that the grief of that tears me apart every year, as it would.
Mm,
But
yeah.
that's the price of love. But you see, the thing is, when I go down to the ocean with my roses to throw them in the sea, people see that and I get compassion from strangers, people who will walk up and just take my hand for a second and then walk on by. And we are there for each other as humans. And it is our job to provide that compassion to other people because nobody can do this alone. It hurts too much.
Yeah.
But you're not alone. You're in a world of 7 billion people.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, if people wanting to talk to you, can they?
Yes, I have a website
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
called excitedforexcellence.co.uk. Get in touch. I answer everybody who does.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you're in the UK because I belong to a foundation for about babies, for babies, and we might be looking for speakers. So I'm going to contact somebody in a minute, and I'm going to have a chat because I think you will be really good for it.
Okay,
Okay.
happy
Anyway,
to help.
thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Lovely
Thank you, Steve.
story, and at the end of the day, whatever happens, in life, try to be strong. I know it's difficult, but we got to keep going. And you got you know your children now are growing up, and you've done well, and but
Yes.
also the memories are still going to be there, and I know it's tough. All right, I know really tough. I remember my wife coming back from holiday once, and all of a sudden, um, you know, we was in a car crash, and yeah, and it's tough, really tough. Um, let's go for some messages here. Um, Hi Steve. Great show. Very passionate. Could you tell me, give me some details so I can contact her about a book and some. Yeah, yeah. What we're going to do, we'll stick everything on our website and you can do it. We've done that already. But to tell you the truth, that we were waiting for this interview, so to stick it on afterwards because we want to kind of like do two separate interviews. And the next one will be about a book because when you go for a book, it's really powerful and it's really interesting. You've got to join me for that because that will be very good. So what we're going to do, we're going to contact you, my wife will, and we'll book you in, and we'll talk about your book because I will go through your book because that is really interesting to
Thank you.
kind of like cover. All right.
Yeah, delighted to.
Thank you so much for joining me, and you take care for now.
Yes. Thanks,
Bless
everyone.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Steve. Bye.